A reading from the book of St. John, chapter 18, verses 1 to chapter 19, verse 42. When Jesus had said these things, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, into which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. Judas, having gathered a band of soldiers and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus said, "I am he." And Judas also, which betrayed him, was with them. When he said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. And he asked them again, "Whom are you looking for?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that. I am he. If you are looking for me, let these men go their way." This was to fulfill the word he had spoken. "Of those you gave me, I have lost none." Then Simon Peter drew his sword and struck the high priest's servant, whose name was Malchus, and cut off his right ear. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. The cup that the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" Then the soldiers, their commander, and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. They led him away first to Annas, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. That disciple was known to the high priest, and he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood without at the door, and the other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, went out and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter also. Then the maid said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "No." Now, the servants and officers had made a fire of fire, because it was cold, and Peter was with them. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard me what I said. They know what I said." And when he had said this, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus, saying, "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus said to him, "If I said something wrong, bear witness about it. If I said something right, why do you strike me?" Then Annas bound Jesus and sent him to Caiaphas. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. Then they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked him, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Peter denied it again, and immediately the rooster crowed. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium. It was early, and they did not enter the praetorium, because they must not be defiled to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They said, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews answered, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." And this happened to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken, indicating by what kind of death he was going to die. Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew. Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight, so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not of this world." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said unto them, I find no fault in him, but I have a custom that I should release unto you one man at the Passover. Shall I therefore release unto you the King of the Jews? But they cried out, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas, for Barabbas was a robber. Pilate had Jesus flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they clothed him with a scarlet robe. And they came up to him and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, Behold, I bring him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Then Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Then Pilate said to them, Behold the man. And when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate said, Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews said, We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. He entered the praetorium again and asked Jesus, Where are you from? Jesus gave no answer. Pilate said to him, Are you not speaking to me? Do you know that I have authority to release you and to crucify you? Jesus answered, You would have no power over me at all if it had not been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews shouted, If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, which in Hebrew is called Gabbatha. And it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about the 6th hour. And he said unto the Jews, Behold your king. They cried out, Away with him, and crucify him. Pilate said to them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Then he handed Jesus over to them to be crucified. And they took Jesus, and he went out, bearing his own cross, to the place called the Place of a Skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, Jesus in the middle and them on either side. Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. It was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, Write not, the King of the Jews, but he said, I am King of the Jews. Pilate said, What I have written, I have written. And then the soldiers, after they had crucified Jesus, divided his clothes into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic, which was seamless, woven from top to bottom. So they said to one another, Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to decide whose it will be. This is to fulfill the scripture. They divided my garments among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. The soldiers did this. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple standing nearby, whom he loved, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that moment on, the disciple took her into his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, and that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now there was a vessel full of vinegar set there, and they filled a sponge with the vinegar, and put it on a hyssop branch and put it to his lips. When Jesus had received the vinegar, he said, It is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It was the day of preparation, and that Sabbath was a high day. So the Jews, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, asked Pilate to have their legs broken, and to have them taken down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the 2 men who had been crucified with him. When they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he that saw it hath borne witness, and his witness is true. And he knoweth that he saith true, that ye also may believe. This happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And another scripture saith, They shall look on him whom they pierced. Joseph of Arimathea, who had become a disciple of Jesus secretly, for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate if he could take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission. He came and took the body away. Nicodemus, who had first seen Jesus at night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Jesus and wrapped it in linen cloths with the spices, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. They buried Jesus there because it was the Jews' day of preparation, and because the tomb was nearby. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.